For listeners who are unfamiliar with autoimmunity, I mean, just at a 30,000 foot level, like what is it?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
autoimmunity?
Yeah. The way I like to describe it, and again, I'm not a doctor or scientist, but I've been living with this for 12 years, or 13 years. Autoimmune diseases are when your immune system is overactive and they attack an otherwise healthy organ that doesn't need to be attacked. It's kind of the way that I'm like, that's the easiest way to explain it to me. So for me, it's my colon, the white blood cells in there that are causing inflammation, and it's trying to fight something off that's not present. People can have, psoriasis, and it can attack their skin, MS. I mean, there's I think 180, 200 or so known autoimmune diseases. Then there's things like lupus that actually can affect your entire body. But essentially, that's the way that I've come to understand it.
Wow, it's amazing that you, as you mentioned, you visited all these doctors and they gave to you basically what I've come to call diagnose and adios. They were just like,
Yeah.
here, take these drugs. There's this incredible meme. I don't know if you've seen it circulating on social media, but it's like there's a woman sitting on the, I don't know what it's called, but like the bench in the doctor's office, and she looks really unhappy, and she's got like spots all over her face, and she clearly, like, the cartoonist drew her to depict how miserable she was feeling, and the quote
Right.
underneath, there's a doctor looking at her, and the doctor's like, well, all your labs look normal, looks like you're okay,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But I mean, so often there are these underlying latent conditions going on, and it really takes becoming your own health investigator, like what you've done,
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
to the root cause. So I just want to
Right.
like applaud you in your journey.
Well, thank you. It's when you feel that helpless and hopeless at that point, I think a lot of times it is hard for people to want to push through because it's just so much to think about, and you don't know the right questions to ask, and you don't know the right tests to request, and that's like something that you hope and expect your doctor to guide you towards. And I definitely had those frustrating. I mean, it took, multiple specialists to finally even get tests and then to be diagnosed. And then even after diagnosis, yeah, I mean, I was sent out the door after a week-long hospital stay of, this is what you have. It's uncurable. You'll have it for life, but just take this. And that was kind of it. They never actually even told me about autoimmunity. They didn't mention those, like that it was an autoimmune disease. They just, kind of sent me out, and we asked why and, how. And that was just kind of like, well, we don't really know, and that was pretty much all the answers we got. So I had to take it into my own hands. It's also just the kind of person I am. But I just had to keep searching and researching and trying to learn about it on my own.
I love that. I can totally relate. So you mentioned that you started scouring these online message boards back in 2007, and you stumbled upon this like grain-free, dairy-free lifestyle. When you first saw,
Yeah.
that mentioned, I mean, like what was going through your head? Because grains, because like growing up in the 80s and 90s, grains were, I thought, were this amazing thing that you've got to eat 7 times a day, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so like what
Yeah,
was
it's
your what,
definitely what we were taught.
yeah.
You know what? To be quite honest with you, I remember being like, I don't even know what a grain is. Yes, like I always heard whole grain is most, it's the healthiest and you're supposed to eat it all the time. And we got rid of like the Wonder Bread and started eating whole grain bread and that type of thing. But if you could have asked me to list the actual foods that were grains, had no idea. So it was a massive learning curve for me. So I think when I first saw it, it probably didn't hit me just how much stuff I was going to have to cut out. It was more of just like, okay, well, this is working. Let's try to give it a shot. But when I really started flipping the ingredient list and looking and like, oh, wow, everything that I'm eating has, grains in it or dairy or soy or corn or, things like that. That was really the kind of eye-opening moment of like, okay, there's a lot we have to change here. And there's a lot I have to, go through and just completely like revamp my kitchen, revamp my pantry. And then on the other side of things, I didn't know how to cook, any other way. I mean, I was pretty young as it was and didn't do a whole lot of cooking in college, but anything I did know how to make came from my mom, my grandma, and it all used grains. So it was, it was a fairly big shift, and it took me a long time. I might always like to say that because I think it's a mental thing for people. I mean, you're grieving your diagnosis and you're grieving all of these foods, and then you're just in this kind of deer in headlights kind of time for a little while where you're just like, I don't even know what to do. It's just so much. And then there's this commitment that you have to make, and that was mentally really hard for me. I'd commit and then I'd fall off and I'd go back and, and I wouldn't see the improvement that I wanted at first, but that's because maybe I was doing 5 days of doing well, but then I'd, go and eat whatever I wanted on the weekends. And so my body just wasn't even having time to recover. So it was a good few years before I really set, my mind to it and was like, no going back. This is it. This is the only way that I can live a full and happy life.
Did you, was there any point at which you grieved grains?
Oh yeah. I mean, grains, dairy, all of it. Yeah. I loved a baguette with cheese. Like I loved a good bowl of oatmeal in the morning. So yeah, there was a long period of time. I'm also like, I'm known now for my baked goods. And it's just, I grieved the celebratory things like, getting to throw a party for family and friends and having a cake or a pie or something like that. Or, it had been another wave when I had started having kids. I have 3 kids and I, went through this kind of wave at the beginning of my first son. He's 10 now, but just this feeling of like, oh, like moms are supposed to be able to make cookies with their kids and sit and enjoy them, or like there's a birthday party at school and I really want him to not feel left out. And so there were multiple kind of times where I grieved the foods that I couldn't have. And that's really what set me on the path of starting to create my own recipes, because I just was like, I refuse to be this young and live the rest of my life feeling like I'm missing out on all of the things that are important to me and the traditions and the like nostalgic times that I remember as a child.
Yeah. I mean, looking over your Instagram, it doesn't look like you're missing out on anything. It's just so, it's just so funny. Like like growing up, like every meal had to have a grain for me,
Right,
like it was either like a sandwich or a wrap or a brown rice bowl or whole wheat pasta. I remember being such a huge fan. I couldn't envision life without grains. But now it's funny, like not only do I never think about grains, I can't really envision life with them, or at least with them taking up the kind of real estate on my plate that they used to take up.
That's what I was going to say. They definitely took up. I mean, I was going to say the same word with real estate. It's like, I feel like that was the majority of what filled us up as kids. It was like a teeny portion of vegetables, if any, a little bit of meat, and then whatever it was, that big starch, on the side. And I always say, when I first started eating this way, paleo was very big. And that's the word that was used a lot just because it classified my recipes. And there was this, kind of caricature at the time going around with like a person just eating this like massive turkey leg, and that's kind of what people thought, that it was just all meat heavy all the time. And I always said I eat more vegetables now than I did before, because there's more space on my plate that I can fill, and I also realized just how nutrient dense and healthy they are and how great they are for my body. But I'm like, cutting out the grains didn't mean for me adding more meat necessarily or other things to fill that in. It was like, oh wow, I actually have expanded my view to eating and filling up more on vegetables.
Yeah, love that. Speaking of vegetables, so in your own personal health journey, there's a lot of talk these days about lectins, inducing what's called molecular mimicry, aggravating people's immune systems when they have active autoimmunity. So have you found that there are any vegetables that you seem to do better, without, or like what's your current diet look like these days?
So the only thing that I found, and it just depends, if I'm symptomatic, which this has not been a perfect journey. I actually had a really bad setback last year, but I've done incredibly well considering and compared to what I used to be. But when I'm symptomatic, vegetables are hard if they're not cooked, and that's pretty standard for anybody with a digestive disease, especially things like leafy greens and things like that. But otherwise, the only one that I don't do a lot of, or I don't really do at all, are white potatoes. And it kind of depends. I can do some nightshades, if they're cooked. I don't do a ton of tomatoes. But the lectin thing I think is interesting. I've been really trying to study and learn kind of over the last couple of years. It's fairly new, all things considered, with my full journey from 2007. But I haven't found it to be super detrimental for me, just in terms of like the seeds in a cucumber or things like that. But I do think there's something to it. And I think everybody's bodies are different. That's what I found. I'm like, I think there's this kind of good baseline, but then there might be nuanced things here and there. But yeah, really just raw stuff when I'm not feeling well. And then white potatoes just don't do well for me. They can cause inflammation and I get bloated and my joints can hurt, and I just kind of stay away from them.
Oh man. Yeah. I didn't want it to sound like I was endorsing like removing lectins or anything like that, but it's just been interesting because a lot of people today, whether it's, sort of a more well, I guess like Gundry-esque approach, who have cut the lectins
Right.
out
Yeah.
or have gone full blown carnivore. It just seems that, some
Mm.
people with active autoimmunity, like it's not just the removal of grains that bring on a reprieve
Right.
of symptoms. It's a more extreme version of that. So I was just wondering if you sort of
Yeah.
dabbled in any of those more extreme dietary patterns.
No, I haven't. Aside from paleo, or occasionally I kind of revert to like an autoimmune protocol when I'm not feeling well, which cuts out the nuts, the seeds, the nightshades. So that definitely is a little bit more extreme. But I found that I don't have to do that all the time, which I'm grateful for. It's really just in order to kind of get symptoms at bay. But really, for me, it's grain and dairy free, no refined sugars, no legumes. But in addition to that, I found and really learned the hard way over the last few years that I actually really have to take care of my body as a whole. I have to make sure that I'm prioritizing rest. I have to make sure I'm prioritizing not being stressed and anxiety and all of those things. And they really kind of go hand in hand with the way that I eat.
Stress is massive. I mean, a
It's
stressful
huge.
event can cause a flare up,